Hi, here I am again, Betsy Payne from Windrush Farm with a story about the horses and ponies and the boys and girls who love them. This one is called Eddie and Mister. I don't know what to do with him, Doris. I really don't. He's not interested in anything. Well, I tried piano lessons, no interest. Then I tried Boy Scouts. He said it was boring. What? She's going where? Oh, I don't think so. I'm not sure he even likes horses. I wish he were old enough to get a real job. That'd keep him busy. But he's not. He could do yard work for folks, but he hasn't made any push to go ask the neighbors. What? Just for a week? Well, I don't know, Doris. How much does it cost? He could? Well, I could just go ahead and apply for him, don't you think? And then if they take him, they pay for the whole thing. Well, why not? He's driving me crazy just hanging around. From his perch at the top of the stairs, Eddie could hear the whole conversation from his Aunt Irma's end. Some kind of a camp. Something to do with horses. Boring. Eddie didn't want to go to horse camp. It would be stupid. He knew it would be boring. When his aunt came to find him and told him about it, he tried a whole bunch of excuses to get out of it. But Aunt Irma, who was herself very boring, just said, "It's a wonderful opportunity that the Saddle Club may give you, and it's a whole week you wouldn't be getting into trouble and into my hair here." Oh, great. A whole week with horses, and worse. He would drive there and back with Coralie, the neighbor's daughter who was crazy about horses. Yuck! Eddie lived in the city of Lynn in a small gray house on a small gray street. He felt like everyone there was gray and boring. Well, Eddie was accepted for a week at the horse camp, and Monday morning Coralie's mother, Mrs. Troop, picked him up and drove him and Coralie about 1,000 miles to Windrush Farm. It really was out in the country. Fields and little narrow roads and a strong smell, which Eddie guessed was horse poop. There were 5 kids in this week's program, and only one other boy. The girls giggled and talked all the time. The other boy, whose name was Connor, obviously had an eating problem. In other words, he ate too much. He was one of those kids who slumps. On the bench, in the place where they all gathered, in the barn where they went to meet the horses, he sat on the floor, leaning against a stall door. "You will have Mr. Eddie," said Marie, his teacher or counselor or whatever you call them. "Mr. what?" said Eddie, in a tired, bored voice. "Just Mr.," she said. "Why don't you take that bag of grooming tools and go inside with your volunteer and get him all brushed and clean so we can put his tack on?" "Why?" said Eddie. "And what's tack?" "Come on, Eddie," said his volunteer, Barbara. "He's been out in the field and he's dirty. We need to get him clean and then put his saddle on and his bridle." Eddie opened the stall door and went inside and stood looking at Mister. Mister was a gray horse with a white mane and tail. Mister stood looking back at Eddie. No, not looking, staring. His head lowered, his front feet far apart. His face looked, well, it looked bored and not especially perky. "Hey, Mister," said Eddie, as the two continued to stare at each other. "How's it going?" Mister continued to stare, and he gave a long sigh. "Yeah," said Eddie, "I agree. Well, let's get it over with, okay?" So he brushed Mister all over, first with a curry comb and then with 2 different brushes. Barbara showed him how to pick the dirt out of Mister's hooves, and then they put on Mister's saddle pad and his saddle, and finally his bridle. And all the while Mister just stood there with his head lowered, his feet apart, though he occasionally would turn to one side or another to stare at Eddie. They led the 5 horses down to the hill from the barn and into the big indoor arena where the riding lessons took place. Mister followed very slowly behind Eddie. Twice he sighed. Eddie reached back and patted his furry gray shoulder. "I know what you mean, fella," said Eddie. Mister made a sort of snorting sound. In the arena, Marie showed them how to lead their horses around, and then they learned the different steps you do before getting on. Oh, big deal, thought Eddie, but he was careful to be sure he did it right. Mister was still staring at him. Okay, said Eddie to Mister, I'm trying, okay? Stirrups down, girth tightened, legs stretched, reins overhead. What did they think they were going to leave them hanging there? Duh. Soon it was Eddie's turn to mount. And then, there he was, astride Mister. Mister nodded his head up and down, up and down. Is that okay with you, Mister? Me getting on? Mister turned around and looked at Eddie. So, okay? Tell Mister to walk on, Marie said. When Eddie told him to, Mister walked on, very slowly. Is that all the faster you can go, said Eddie. Squeeze with your legs and heels, cried Marie. Eddie tried it, and sure enough, Mister speeded up. A little. After a lot of walking and steering, which Mister and Eddie were very good at, Marie said, Now we'll try a little trot. Trot, said Eddie to Mister. Mister walked a little faster. Squeeze hard, called Marie. Eddie squeezed. Mister walked a little faster. And then he squeezed as hard as he could, and hey, wow! Mister began a slow trot, sort of a shuffle, but definitely not a walk. Hey, he's trotting, yelled Eddie. Go, Mister! At that, Mister pricked his ears forward and began to trot faster. Hey, called Eddie, look at us, look at Mister. Good job, Eddie, said Marie. It seemed like only minutes later they were dismounting and leading horses back up to the barn. Eddie put Mister in a stall next to Tori, took off his saddle and bridle and brushed him. When do we get to ride again? He said to Marie. She smiled at him. Later this afternoon, after lunch, she said. Eddie felt excited and not a bit bored. After that first morning, time seemed to fly. Each morning when they arrived, they did barn chores, and then it was time to ride. Each time he saddled up Mister, Eddie felt excited, and he couldn't wait to see what they would learn in the lesson. They trotted a lot. They wove around orange cones in the arena. They practiced sitting in something called jumping position and went over poles on the ground, trotting smoothly. Mister was very good at that, and Eddie felt proud. Wednesday, when Eddie came up to the barn in the morning, Mister saw him and made a low whinnying noise at him. Hey, Eddie, said Marie, Mister's whickering at you. That means he knows you and likes you. Mister, said Eddie, hey, boy, I like you too. He patted him on the neck and on the nose. Mister nodded his head up and down. Eddie looked around to see if anyone was looking. They weren't, so he hugged Mister, a big, quick hug. Mister nodded some more. It was during the lesson that afternoon that Eddie suddenly realized that tomorrow was Thursday and after that was Friday, and then no more horse camp, no more Mister. Oh no, thought Eddie, no more Mister. No more Windrush Farm. And all at once he didn't want that to happen. He didn't want Friday afternoon to come. No more lessons, no more Mister, no more barn chores, feeding, tacking, cleaning, no more Mister. Just back at the little gray house in the little gray street in Lynn and being bored, sitting in his room, sitting on the front steps, being bored, no more Mister. On Thursday afternoon, they went on a trail ride, out to the back pasture and then into the woods. It was nice out there, and all the horses enjoyed doing something different, trotting along a path, looking for animals. They crossed a stream, and Mister leaned down to have a drink and then splashed the water with his hoof. Eddie felt very happy, but he wished camp didn't have to end. He wished he could stay and ride Mister and learn more about horses and riding. They went down a hill and passed an old barn. That's the old Tyler place, said Marie. It's abandoned. No one lives there now. The barn was dilapidated looking with some boards missing, and the house a little farther on up the hill had a hole in the roof, and the back door was hanging off crookedly. They rode up the overgrown drive and then back into the woods. And that was when Eddie got his big idea. It was a wild idea, a crazy idea, and maybe it would work. He could try anyway. Otherwise, it was the end, and Eddie just couldn't stand that. He began to plan. He thought, and he thought, and he thought. When they got back to the farm, Marie told them that the next day, Friday, they would have a horse show. They could invite their families to show them what they'd learned all week. That night, Eddie continued to think and to plan. The next morning, when they got to the farm, Marie told them that they would need to do a especially good grooming job on their horses, and then she would show them how to braid their manes for the horse show. Perfect, thought Eddie. I'll go last. Mr. got really dirty last night. I need to get him clean, said Eddie. I'll take him outside where the dirt will blow away. Well, that's lame, he thought, but no one paid any attention. He put on Mr.'s halter and a lead rope and led him outside. He looked around. Everyone was inside, learning how to braid. Good. Slowly and quietly, Eddie led Mr. down the hill and onto the dirt road leading out to the field and to the woods. When he got to the log jump on the way, he led Mr. over and boosted himself on Mr.'s back. It was slippery, but he'd learned how to grip with his knees. It was okay. Come on, mister, here we go, he said. Mr. Ham ambled on down the path and into the woods. Come on, mister, hurry up, said Eddie. Mister did a small trot. Eddie thought they would never reach the hill down to the old barn, but at last they did. He slid off Mister and led him up to the barn. He pushed the door, and it moved partway open. Eddie looked inside. It was dark and musty, but he could see stalls and up above, edges of a hayloft. Come on, mister, let's find you a stall, said Eddie. But Mister did not want to go in that barn. He planted his feet apart and would not budge. Oh, dear, said Eddie, and he led Mister over to an old trough in the yard and sat down on the edge to think. His plan was to leave Mister in a stall and then go back to the farm while they were all having the horse show and borrow a wheelbarrow with some grain and a bale of hay. Then Mister would have dinner and maybe even breakfast, and then it was at this point that Eddie's plan began to get vague. Then what? What would he, Eddie, get to eat, and where, and how could he just stay there? Well, for how long could they stay there? Maybe he could find a family nearby and they'd let him work for food. He'd read about that happening in a book he read, or maybe it was a movie, and the boy stayed there and then moved on. Clop, 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 clop. Eddie heard a horse's hoofs approaching down the hill, and he froze. Mister looked up and whinnied. No, mister, shh. Eddie's voice was a low wail. Oh, no. Marie trotted into the barnyard and jumped down off her horse, Mac. Eddie was suddenly very scared. He had stolen a horse. He had left without permission. Oh, what would happen? He shut his eyes and held tight to Mister's reins. Eddie, said Marie, we didn't know what had happened or where you were. All the families are there for the horse show, and suddenly we saw you weren't in Mister's stall or outside. What on earth, I asked myself, why would he disappear, and where would he go? Eddie stared at her, feeling a huge lump in his stomach, like maybe he was going to throw up, or even worse, cry. But, continued Marie, then I thought fast and I realized two things. She paused. Eddie didn't think he could talk, but he managed it. What two things? His voice sounded funny and croaky at the same time. What two things? Marie stared at him. Well, first, I have seen that you really like Mister, and I knew that you would never do anything to hurt him. Then second, I realized you wanted to stay here at Windrush Farm, but that this was the last day, and you couldn't. So you took Mister and ran here. She actually smiled at him. I know how you feel. I've felt that way. You wanted something really badly, and you tried to get it the only way you could think of. You made a plan, but not enough of a plan. Eddie swallowed hard, and guessed maybe one fat tear escaped and ran down his face. How did you know I was here? He whispered. Again, Marie smiled. I saw your face when we came riding through here yesterday. I may have even seen the light bulb go on, but I didn't know why then. Wow, said Eddie, you are smart. Thank you, said Marie. Now we need to make a plan for you. You mean you're going to call the police? No, Eddie, I don't think we need to do that. You know, you did something wrong, and I think that will be enough punishment. It will be enough punishment for you not to see Mister for a while. But, Eddie, how old are you? Huh? Said Eddie, And he told her. Well, that's great, because as soon as you've had your birthday, you will be old enough to come and work in the barn at Windrush after school or on weekends. Then you can learn a lot more about horses and running a barn, and you could see a lot more of Mister. Oh, wow, said Eddie, I can really come and work and see Mister? Wow. But wait, how will I get here? You are lucky, said Marie, because your neighbor Coralie is already old enough, and she is going to come and do barn work. So I imagine if you ask nicely and offer to pay for some gas money, her mom will bring you. Now Eddie really couldn't talk, so he just slid off the water trough, threw his arms around Mister, and hugged. And Mr. sighed hugely. Well, good. That stuff was all over, and they could go back. He needed to get home now. It was lunchtime. The end.